Hey, how you getting on? Today on Baldy Plays with Magnets, I compare some 10-inch guitar speakers to their 12-inch counterparts with Tube Amp Doctor. Over the last 1.5 to 2 years, I've kind of gotten comfortable in this specific niche of guitar YouTuberism, which is guitar speakers. And in that time, I've demoed several guitar speaker models, must be about 20 at this stage. All of them 12-inch guitar speakers, because that's kind of the industry standard. Most cabs have 12-inch guitar speakers. But I've gotten a few requests to demo some 10-inch guitar speakers since then. And I would love to have done that. There's just one problem. See, all of my guitar cabs are designed for 12-inch guitar speakers. And if the geometry of that problem isn't obvious, let me show you. But then I stumbled upon this. This is not a medieval torture device. This is a baffle converter. Tube Amp Doctor make these, and these allow you to mount 10-inch speakers on these studs here, and then mount the conversion ring to your 12-inch guitar cabinet. So kind of an adapter so that I can use 10-inch guitar speakers in 12-inch cabinets. And when I found this, I had an idea. I contacted my good buddy Tom at Tube Amp Doctor and asked him if he would be interested in participating in a test where we compare 12-inch guitar speakers to their 10-inch counterparts. Much to my delight, Tom was on board and not only sent me this baffle converter, but a few 10-inch guitar speakers to do a shootout with. So yeah, most of the guitar speakers in this video have been provided by Tube Amp Doctor as well as the baffle converter. These are also available from 15 inches to 12 inches, by the way, so you can mount 12-inch guitar speakers and 15-inch guitar cabs. I'll have affiliate links to the baffle converters and all the speakers in this test down in the description below. I suppose you could consider this a sponsored video. If not sponsored, then definitely enabled by Tube Amp Doctor. So thanks very much to Tom and Tube Amp Doctor for helping me out on this. So basically the idea was to compare some 10-inch guitar speakers to the same model in 12 inches. And Tube Amp Doctor stocks several speakers that fit the bill. In this test, we'll be looking at 2 Celestion speakers and 1 Jensen speaker. We will be comparing the Jensen Blackbird 40 and 12 inches to 10 inches, the Celestion G12 Vintage to the Celestion G10 Vintage, as well as the 10-inch Creamback to both the Creamback H and the Creamback M. This test will probably not be as methodical as some of my other tests because you can't really make it that. See, the 10-inch guitar speaker model isn't just the 12-inch guitar model shrunk down by 17%. Often they are slightly different designs, so the comparison isn't... We can't really go about this scientifically. You can see here for the Jensen, for example, the dust cap has the exact same size. And it's the same for the Celestion models in this test as well. And then again, for the Creamback, the question is, which 12-inch Creamback is the 10-inch Creamback based on? Is it based on one of them at all? Or is it just a 10-inch guitar speaker design that is similar in character to the Creambacks in 12-inch? And for that reason, I didn't take the 10-inch Creamback into this test as well, because according to Celestion, that speaker, the 10-inch Creamback, is based on a speaker from the 70s. So not really a smaller version of the Creamback 25 as we know and love it. So we've limited the test to just 2 Celestions and 1 Jensen in this video. There's more. For example, the Jensen Silverbird is also available in 10 and 12 inches. As is the V-Type Junior, which is the 10-inch V-Type from Celestion. Depending on how this video goes, we might make a part 2 with more models, so keep that in mind and drop a comment if you want to see more of these. Each of the 12-inch guitar speaker models for this test has had their dedicated video on my channel before, so I know them all, and I've mic'd them all up in their sweet spot according to my ears, and that's going to be the reference mic position for this video. Each 12-inch speaker is going to get mic'd up in its sweet spot and compared to its 10-inch counterpart. For the 10-inch speakers, I'm not entirely sure how many mic positions I'm going to be using for each individual 10-inch speaker. I'm definitely going to be using the same absolute position, so the same distance in millimeters from the center of the speaker to the Shure SM57. But as I've implied, these are smaller, and that is not the same relative position. The same relative distance would have the Shure SM57 slightly closer to the center of the speaker. But I'm not sure how that's going to sound. I'm going to have to figure that out as I go. Anyway, if the 10-inch speaker has a different sweet spot according to my ears, I'm going to mic that up as well, obviously. So, I haven't done anything yet except talk. I guess there's only one thing left to do, and that is to do it. So I'm going to be popping the speakers in, micing them up, doing some tests, and then I'll see you for a bit of a playthrough, I guess. Alright, while you look at this pretty B-roll footage, I'd like to tell you what I found out in pre-recording testing, and that is that the 10-inch speakers behave a lot like the 12-inch speakers. Duh, big shocker, I know. With the microphone in the center of the speaker, obviously it's pretty bright, but the further you move out from the center, the more the high end rolls off. For the Celestions, the sweet spot was generally somewhere around where the dust cap meets the cone, so I'm using the same absolute microphone position for the 10-inch Celestions as I'm doing with the 12-inch Celestions, so where the dust cap meets the cone. The Blackbirds behave pretty similarly, and the sweet spot for those was just outside of the dust cap. My videos already tend to be pretty long, and if I mess around with several mic positions for 7 speakers in this video, we'll be here for hours, and I don't think we want that. I'm using a different amplifier for each speaker type in this video, firstly because I can, and I think certain amps work better with certain speakers. For the Creamback Shootout, I've chosen the Lichtlam Audio Prometheus because it's my favorite amp and I haven't used it in a while, and I think its character works well with the Creamback speakers. I've got the Creamback M in here at the moment. I'll just be playing a few riffs with both speakers mic'd up in the sweet spot, and then I'll be changing this out for the Creamback H. Alright, I'm going to change the Creamback M out for the Creamback H. Shout out to gravity stands. These stands are brilliant for this kind of stuff. All right, that is the 10-inch Creamback compared to both ferrite magnet 12-inch Creamback models I have. And the first thing you will have noticed is probably that the 10-inch Creamback sounded a little more quiet than the 12-inch ones in this video. And the reason for that is it was kind of tricky for me to level match them because I can't just go by perceived volume, I have to watch the meters as well. You will have noticed in the graphs that the 10-inch Creamback had a real bump in the low end. It had much more rumble going on down there. And if I had matched them to have the same perceived volume, so bring up the mids in the 10-inch Creamback, it would have kind of bounced off the meter for me. I would have had a really overpowering low end. And I don't think that serves the speaker nor us as listeners either. So I chose it to do the way I did it. Anyway, the other question I had was, which one of the 12-inch Creambacks would this 10-inch Creamback be most similar to? Just based on the physical perception of it, I would have guessed that it would be closer to the M Creamback. And my reasons for that is, this is the 10-inch Vintage, so the 10-inch Vintage 30, even though it doesn't say Vintage 30, and that is heavier than this 10-inch Creamback. And the Vintage 30 in 12-inch and the Creamback H in 12-inch are roughly the same weight, so I figured this is lighter. This will probably be closer to the M Creamback. But I don't really think it sounds closer to one or the other. I tried judging that just based on their tone, and I couldn't really decide. It's just a 10-inch speaker designed with the same flavor in mind, I guess. For the Vintage 30 and G10 Vintage Shootout, I chose a 5150 because apparently that's the law. 5150s and Vintage 30s just go together. That's a tried and true combination. Does that make any sense? I don't know. Both the Vintage 30 and the G10 Vintage are mic'd up with the dust cap meets the comb. That's the sweet spot to my ears for both. Let's go. So that's the G10 Vintage compared to the G12 Vintage 30. And again, like the 10-inch Creamback, the G10 Vintage had a big bump at the low end. It had that same rumbly character. So again, I had these level matching issues. And again, I chose to go by the meters a bit. The meters on the 10-inch, the meters... The meters for the G10 Vintage were actually a bit higher than they were for the Vintage 30, but still the Vintage 30 will probably have sounded louder to you than the G10 Vintage. Does it sound like a Vintage 30? A little bit. It's really its own thing. I think it's its own speaker design with similar design parameters in mind, I guess. Not really a Vintage 30, but not too far away from it either, at least in my opinion. I chose the Marshall JVM 410 HJS, the Joe Satriani edition for the Jensen Blackbird 40 Shootout, because the Jensen Blackbird 40 has a lot of top-end energy, and the Satriani JVM has a nice rounded top end. I think these speakers will pair quite nicely with this amp. The microphones, the SM57s, are outside the dust cap, so slightly further outside of the center of the speaker than they are for the Celestians. Because of that top-end energy, I think the speakers sound a little nicer there. All right, that was the 10-inch Jensen Blackbird 40 compared to the 12-inch Jensen Blackbird 40. And this behaved differently than the 10-inch Celestions compared to their 12-inch counterparts. This one didn't have that big bump in the low end. In fact, the low end characteristic pretty much followed that of the 12-inch Blackbird. It was only in the high end that they were different. And if you've seen my Blackbird 12-inch video, you'll know that I've spoken to Ignacio from Jensen a bit about this speaker, and he already told me that this 10-inch Blackbird will have a rolled off high end compared to the 12-inch Blackbird. I like this a lot. This is probably my favorite speaker from this shootout. Okay, let's wrap this up. First of all, I want to give another little shout out to the unsung hero of this test, which is this conversion ring that Tube Amp Doctor sent me. A really simple idea, but really well executed, I might say. I really had no issues with it whatsoever. Usually, when I open a cab and I see that the speakers are mounted on studs like these with nuts rather than bolts, I groan because more often than not, I find them very difficult to work with because usually the studs are too long to get the socket on to unscrew the nuts. More often than not, they're lock nuts, so they're a pain in the ass to get off. But really, there's no other way to do this. If you were to use threaded inserts and bolts for this side as well, you might end up with threads sticking out the other side depending on the speaker you decide to mount in that. So there's really no other way other than to do it with these studs here. But the nuts that Tube Amp Doctor use are cool, and I'd like to show them to you. I hope you can see this on camera, but there's a washer, I hope this focuses. There's a washer attached to the nut that rotates. So these nuts are really easy to screw on. It's very cool to work with. I think this is awesome. So if you want to mount a 10-inch speaker in your 12-inch cab, definitely check these out. Now to the speakers. Both the 10-inch Celestion speakers in this video had that massive bump in the low end, which made it very hard for me to level match those speakers. And I was beginning to think that may have to do with the design parameters of my cab. So meaning that the speakers just react to the cab that way, that was inherent to 10-inch speakers in this big enclosure, because this is an oversized cab as well. So it really isn't designed for 10-inch speakers. Unfortunately, it's the only 2x12 cab I have here. But the 10-inch Blackbird pretty much lined up exactly with the 12-inch Blackbird in the low end. So it's nothing inherent to 10-inch guitar speakers. It must have something to do with Celestion's design philosophy. As I mentioned before, I've spoken to Ignacio from Jensen Guitar Speakers about this a bit before. That man was foolish enough to give me his phone number, and usually when I finish these tests, it's pretty late, but in my enthusiasm, I text him anyway. So I text that poor man at the most ludicrous, inappropriate hours. He probably looks at his phone and goes, "Testa di cazzo" every time. But he answers me every time and we have a good conversation. So shout out to Ignacio. He mentioned that 10-inch guitar speakers tend to be designed around smaller cabs and open back cabs. And with open back cabs, you tend to not have that focused low end. They fill the room more. So it would make sense to me if Celestion designed these 10-inch speakers with that in mind specifically, to kind of compensate for the lack of low-end thump an open back cab would give by voicing the speakers with more low-end to begin with. Of course, that's all speculation and really calls for a follow-up test. I really need to get a different cab, an open back cab maybe designed around 10-inch speakers, and redo this test a bit. So let me know in the comments if you want to see that, or let me know if you don't want to see that. Then I won't waste my time on that. And there's one more thing I want to show you about the speakers that I found pretty interesting, and that is, take a look at the cones. This is the Blackbird, this is the 12-inch cone, and this is the 10-inch cone. And I hope you're able to see that on camera, but the ribs, or corrugations as Ignacio calls them, they are different shapes. They look entirely different. And that is the same for all 10-inch and all 12-inch guitar speakers in this test. The ribs on the 12-inch speakers tend to look a bit more like arches, while the ribs in the 10-inch speakers, they seem to be spaced further apart. Yeah, there's spaces in between them. It's just like little bumps in there, not like a sequence of arches. I find that very interesting, and the Celestions look the same. I wonder if they sourced the cones from the same place, Jensen and Celestion, at least for the 10-inch guitar speakers. And maybe I can get Ignacio drunk enough at Guitar Center for him to tell me. So what's left to say? Yeah, tell me your opinion in the comments. Would you use 10-inch guitar speakers in your 12-inch cab with a conversion ring like that? What did you think of the 10-inch guitar speakers in general? And would you like to see a follow-up test, maybe with more 10-inch guitar speaker models like the 10-inch Creamback and the V-Type Junior, and maybe the Jensen Silverbird or other 10-inch guitar speakers I might be able to find? Or maybe in a different cab, an open back cab, or even a 10-inch open back cab. Let me know. Let's chat in the comments. Tell me what you think. Affiliate links to all the speakers and the conversion rings are down in the description and the pinned comment. If you want to support me, that's always a great way. And Tube Amp Doctor are awesome folks. Thank you very, very much to Tube Amp Doctor for hooking me up with all this stuff. And thanks to my Patreons. I upload IR packs and amp captures on my Patreon. You guys are awesome. Your support means an awful lot to me. Enough talking. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next video. Bye bye.